Hey there, it's Tom Jordan, 5 weeks out until Election Day, and tonight it's the Veeps who are going to go at it. The vice presidential debate between Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz could become a pretty pivotal moment in this 2024 election. You know, historically, vice presidential debates have not been, drastically shifted voter opinions a whole lot, but with the stakes this high, and margins in the swing states razor thin, which we'll get into in a bit, the performances of these two candidates might prove more important than ever, you would think, tonight. So J.D. Vance, he's known for his outspoken criticism of the Biden administration's immigration policies, amongst a whole other list of policies as well. He'll likely focus on contrasting his vision of national security with the current Democratic leadership. On the other side, it's Tim Walz, a far left and far from moderate governor with a reputation for standing for child gender transition surgeries without parental approval, and then casting Republicans as out of touch. He'll seek to present himself as a pragmatic leader focused on unity for the country. So for voters, this could be the final opportunity to see direct contrast between the two major party tickets before November. Also in the program, I'm going to take you to Friday's Donald Trump Town Hall in Warren, Michigan, where I had a chance to talk with some Trump supporters. Here's a preview.
Sure. My name's Tom.
Tom, good name. That's my name as well. You're a woman, right? Okay. So do you feel that some women say that Donald Trump is a threat to women? Do you believe that?
Not at all.
Why not? You're African American.
Yeah.
Yep. And you're a Republican, I take it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard this, but there's a rumor out there that Donald Trump wrote Project 2025. Have you heard that rumor?
I have.
Do you believe it's true?
No, I don't.
Yeah, because it's not true. He did not write it. He was not a part of it. But we'll get into all of that throughout the week. We're going to do different highlights of some of the conversations with a variety of Trump supporters. And it's a pretty diverse crowd, actually, surprisingly, because you wouldn't hear that on the media. But so we talked to a lot of different people. We'll be highlighting those, one of those interviews later today in this particular podcast. Before we get to that, just a reminder to chime in, comments. You can ask questions in the comments section, and I'll get to those in a moment as well. Also, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe and then click that notification bell. That helps us out a lot. All right. I've actually thought some of the most enjoyable election debate moments have happened during the vice presidential debates in times past. And here's a few examples as to why I think that.
Admiral Stockdale, your opening statement, please, sir.
Who am I? Why am I here?
I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency.
I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
To which Dan Quayle took great offense. So for me, that was 1988, and that was the first year that I was allowed to vote. So I became very much engaged in that particular election. I was in previous ones as well, but more so that one. As I got older, of course, I become even more engaged. So there might be some similar, memorable moments in tonight's vice presidential debate. But to me, this aspect of this presidential contest has more riding on it than in years past, I think. And I hate to say it, but there's a real threat against Donald Trump's life. And if someone succeeds, even after he wins the election, the vice presidential pick is a critical position, not to mention the role the vice president plays in the U.S. Senate, particularly in these, tiebreaker votes that we have seen as of late when there's such a close margin in the majority. And Kamala Harris played a critical role in her position as vice president, casting those tiebreaker votes in the U.S. Senate. So J.D. Vance's stance on immigration will likely resonate, I think, with voters concerned about, national security and economic stability, contrasting with Tim Walz's more lenient approach, to say the least. His and Kamala Harris' desire to grant U.S. citizenship to millions of illegal immigrants who crossed over the border in the last 3 years. That's their stance. They're going to kind of minimize that right now because it's not a popular stance, but that is the way they have believed about immigration for many, many years. I think this debate presents J.D. Vance this opportunity to highlight the economic burden of unchecked immigration, How does that affect us? An issue that affects middle-class Americans the most. Tim Walz might try to focus on bipartisanship, but his records suggest a stronger alignment with the far-left progressive wing of his party, potentially alienating moderate voters in this. So the role of the vice president in breaking the Senate ties, this is where I go back to. I think it's important. It could be a critical issue with Harris's frequent use of this power. J.D. Vance should emphasize, I think, tonight the importance of experienced leadership, as recent history shows that the vice president could be just one heartbeat away from the presidency. All right, so there is that. Then there is the presidential race itself and the consequences. Do you even know who the Democratic candidate really is? Kamala Harris. She was at the border last week, promising that if she is elected, she will fix the border, something she's refused to do during her current administration. And as the single most important person in charge of the border for the past 3.5 years, she has done just the opposite. She supports open borders. And given those who cross it, she supports giving them U.S. citizenship. And despite her claims, Kamala Harris has emerged as a real significant threat to the foundation of America's constitutional republic, according to a new analysis. And I'm going to talk to the author of that new analysis in a moment. Margot Cleveland with The Federalist is going to come back in the program. Kamala Harris's campaign is gaining momentum. And critics are warning that her policies, also including and ranging from censoring free speech to packing the Supreme Court, could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the United States. Kamala Harris has a history of supporting government-backed censorship, notably deplatforming Donald Trump during her Senate tenure. Yeah, she's gone that far, and many of his supporters. And she remains open to reshaping the judiciary by expanding the number of justices on the Supreme Court. And perhaps most alarming is her stance on border security. The Biden-Harris administration has overseen, of course, this unprecedented surge in illegal immigration. It does strain resources. It does endanger communities. Former Vice President Dick Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris over Donald Trump, that should tell you how far gone that portion of the Republican Party has gone in terms of supporting these far-left liberal policies. What about the concern about protecting constitutional liberties? So there's all of that. So free speech, a big aspect of this, illegal immigration, the economy, and the rule of government. How does that stand today? All right, so I spoke with Margot Cleveland. She's with The Federalist just prior to this live broadcast of Tom Jordan Live. Here's our conversation. Margot Cleveland is an investigative journalist and serves as the senior legal correspondent for The Federalist and joins us now. Margot, so good to have you back. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I know today's a big day, and we're going to get into this vice presidential debate that's happening tonight. But first, I want to talk about some of these responses from, this hurricane that has devastated so much of Florida and Georgia and North Carolina. And I just wonder who is in the Oval Office right now. I know Joe Biden has finally made a statement regarding, helping out the disaster. I mean, more than 100 people have been killed in this. It's a disaster area. And he comes out and kind of seems like, yeah, we've done all we can right now. We're good. And the reporters are asking him, how much more assistance can we provide for these citizens from the federal government? He goes, no more. We're good right now. Do you think Joe Biden has any clue as to what's going on in this country?
I don't. And in fact, the clip that you are referencing, he mentioned Florida. Florida has been in good shape. The governor there knows how to do hurricanes. The problem here is in North Carolina and Tennessee, the impact was inland. And a lot of people, if they haven't pulled up the map and looked at what was hit, this was a 100-year storm that has devastated the inland areas. So the people there have never experienced this before. The local governments have never experienced this before. And for Biden to get on and talk about the damage in Florida, which is real, but completely ignore what was going on in Tennessee and North Carolina and North Georgia, that is a real problem. Who knows what he's been told, but he clearly doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah, and I just wonder, and I know we're 5 weeks out from the election, but then there's time until the end of the year, until the inauguration day. And, in January of 2025. So that's quite a bit of time still for Joe Biden to be in office. And I wonder if it's too late. I mean, should the 25th Amendment be invoked? Because, and if it were to happen, and I know it's not going to, but if that were to happen and Kamala Harris became president in the interim, do you think that would be a benefit somehow to this country, or would that when you think about politically, would that benefit her campaign? Would that help Donald Trump? How do you see that as a potential, realistic or not, and how might that impact the election?
So I don't think it would benefit the country because Biden's not running it. Harris isn't running it. Nothing is going to change. Whoever is pulling the strings is going to be pulling the strings under Biden or Harris. I think politically it would be devastating to Harris, which is why it hasn't been done and why the media is ignoring it. Because for Biden to be pulled on the 25th Amendment or even an effort, that means he's mentally incapacitated, which is what we knew and which she knew. And I've been saying this since that debate where it became clear to everyone this is disqualifying for Harris. She very well knew his lack of capacity, and not just her, the people around. And yet they ignored the 25th Amendment. They ignored their obligation under the Constitution, and they would have continued to do so had it not been put on display. So I'm like, I don't think this is going to happen. But if it did, the only thing that I think would come of it would be it would create evidence that Harris is even more culpable for letting this go on as long as she has.
Yeah, and I don't know anyone in this country who realistically believes that Kamala Harris had no idea of, Joe Biden's mental capacity, but somehow still the media reporters will not ask her that question. Why do you think that is?
They want her to win. It's very clear. Anything that hurts her and her campaign, they either don't ask, they ask in a multiple choice or in a softball, and then they don't ask any more follow-ups. Why is she able to do this? Because they let her. There's no question about it. The time you saw the media going after Biden, where they're like, oh my gosh, we didn't know it. Baloney, they didn't know
Of course,
it.
right.
But they went hard against him for 2 weeks to get him out of the campaign so that they would not lose the election. The second he was out, they're like, okay, we're fine. Nothing else to see here. That's exactly why they're doing it with Harris.
It was quite coincidental, wasn't it, that all the members of the legacy media outlets all found out at the exact same time that Joe Biden somehow had some mental acuity issues, the night of that debate, when we've been talking about it for years, even prior to him winning the presidential election back in 2020. But that's how it is right now. So, okay, so one more question regarding kind of this area of discussion prior to getting into the vice presidential debate tonight. Kamala Harris, a lot of people don't really know who she is. It still stuns me because, there's a lot of evidence to some of the things that she has supported, these far left ideological ideas and progressive policies that she's supported her entire career. Somehow people still don't get who she is. And there's not been a lot of discussion about maybe who she would like to see in her presidential candidate. I'm sorry, her cabinet if she were to win the election. Who do you feel would be some of those people who would take those positions, like Energy Secretary or the Department of Justice and those types of positions, Homeland Security Secretary, all consequential places? I know that she wants to separate herself from Joe Biden, that they're somehow two completely different people in terms of ideology. But do you see the evidence that that's the case? And who do you think she would pick to fill some of these cabinet seats?
I think she would maintain almost to the cabinet position, Joe Biden's cabinet. And the fact that she has not separated herself from his policies, as much as she wants to say, as you can see, I'm not Joe Biden, she hasn't separated herself in any of her policies. I don't see her throwing out these cabinet members. She might have to elevate different ones. You've got, Mayor Pete, who's probably wanting to get out of transportation secretary, maybe to something higher up. And he's been doing a lot of campaigning for her on the government dime as the secretary, the transportation secretary. But I don't think she's going to really do anything of a shakeup because, in her view, they're all doing a great job. I mean, isn't that the whole? We're doing a great job in the economy. We've addressed inflation. We've addressed the border crisis. That part and parcel. The whole point for the election is that Trump left us this bad stuff and we've fixed it. And her policies are not going to be any different. So why should we change? Why should she change the cabinet when, in fact, her cabinet has been a disaster? From the attorney general, who not just did the weaponization, but this attorney general changed the rules for asylum. That was one of the things that happened is he changed what Jeff Sessions did, which made clear, look, you only get asylum if you're targeted because of something inherent, like your religion or your race. You don't get to come here because there's violence in your country or you've been a victim of spousal abuse. That's all horrible, but that's not what asylum is for. Merrick Garland changed that. And I don't see Harris changing that. You don't see any change coming with what's going on internationally, which I think that that's another huge problem. The Middle East is a mess, but frankly, I'm kind of seeing the country learning that sometimes you get peace not through diplomacy, but by defeating evil. And we're seeing Israel do that. So, in some ways, the fact that we have a weak president, a weak cabinet, is allowing Israel to finally stop what has been going on for generations there.
Yes, they've kind of gotten under the thumb of the United States, and they're doing what they believe is the best thing for them, which is how these countries should operate. What is the best for us? How do we best protect ourselves and our sovereignty? And they're going all the way up to Iran, and now the Ayatollah is terrified of what his outcome might be based on this great success of the Israeli Defense Forces and how they're to be able to combat against Hamas and Hezbollah and now the Houthis. And it's amazing to see that. And you're right, it is a fight against evil. And I thought the United States was on the side of good versus evil. So this goes back to Kamala Harris and some of her ideology. She sympathizes with a lot of these pro-Hamas protesters in this country. And to me, there was an opportunity. We talked about the vice presidential debate tonight. There was an opportunity for Kamala Harris to show the United States that maybe she's not a moderate, but she is willing to consider more moderate positions on a lot of these policies. And she had that opportunity to pick a more moderate vice presidential candidate, and like a Shapiro. Instead, she went for one of the most far left progressive socialist type of candidates in a Tim Walz from Minnesota. And now he's going to debate someone very different than him. That'd be J.D. Vance tonight. Let's start with Tim Walz. I mean, what's your perspective of who he really is? He's trying to present himself as the average, Midwestern kind of football coach kind of fella. He's a dad and is just like all of us, but he's seemingly, to me, far different than that.
I absolutely agree. I think it is a effort to kind of give the, gee whiz, I'm a great guy, warm and fuzzy, because that's what they think appeals to middle America. But having grown up in Wisconsin, I can tell you that it looks fake from every angle that you look at it. And if you look at his policies, as you mentioned, this is far left. He has connections to China, which is extremely troubling given what we have seen. He has pushed for transgender ideology, including issues with minors and mutilation, in effect. That his policies on abortion are so extreme that, but again, so is Harris in this case. So they're bedfellows, you could say, in that respect, that they both agree that abortion has no limits. And in fact, he changed the law to make clear that the doctors could allow a baby that was born alive in an abortion to die. So we are talking about extreme facts about him. You got to wonder, why has he not been out there? I think he did one interview and he really kind of messed up the question about his stolen valor, which is another huge issue. That, look, he was the guy who should have been taking care of his troops and having been deployed, but instead he backed out of that responsibility that he had agreed to. So I think he's going to have a tough debate, especially what we've seen from Vance.
Yeah, I refuse to believe that the majority of Americans believe it's okay for a minor to come to a state like Minnesota, where Tim Walz is the governor and supports this, come there, who's 13 years old, in order to get a gender transition surgery approval from the state, and then require that the parents no longer have any role in that person's life, that child's life, because of this decision, because the parents don't support this gender affirming care for a 13-year-old. And I don't think most Americans believe in that, but Tim Walz does, and he supports it, thinks it's the right thing to do. So I think he's very out of step. And that's probably why he's not doing these interviews, because the reality of who he really is in this darkness, I think it is dark. I think it's evil. Tim Walz and Kamala Harris are two peas in a pod. They believe a lot of the same things. So you get that, and then you got J.D. Vance tonight, and he's someone who's pretty, family values kind of guy. He believes in a strong border, which Kamala Harris is pretending now to believe in, but she doesn't. Tim Walz, by extension, I assume, is trying to make the same case. What do you think Tim Walz, well, aside from Tim Walz, J.D. Vance needs to do tonight to just dispel all these, legacy media myths and narratives about how unkind he is and how dangerous he is, and just explains to people what he really stands for that maybe connects with the majority of Americans? What does he do? What does he need to say tonight?
So I think he needs to do exactly what he has been doing since he was named, which is to talk and address the issues and to counter when people are saying things that are not accurate. When Trump selected him, I was okay with it. I kind of was thinking maybe the governor of Virginia. I was thinking of it more strategically of what states could he bring in. Every time Vance has spoken, I have fallen more in love with him as a vice president. He is well spoken. He knows what he believes. He knows how to say it in ways that everyone can understand. He does not put up with the press manipulating things, and he knows how to counter. And when he counters, he does two things. He counters the falsehood, and then he brings the real facts. So I think he doesn't have to do anything other than be himself. And the people who have never seen him, other than those edited clips or things taken out of context, will realize that this guy is really solid. And he's not the weird one. It's Walz who is.
Yeah, Tim Walz keeps using that phrase "weird," and it's like, okay, no, you're right. Tim Walz is the weird one here. Probably one of the best things I've probably ever seen written on X, formerly Twitter, was from J.D. Vance, and he was addressing the second assassination attempt of Donald Trump. And he was talking about this progression of what censorship is, the censorship of speech. And if somebody doesn't be quiet, doesn't shut up, it grows in this attempt to shut somebody down to the point where it finally becomes, well, there's one way to keep somebody quiet, and that is to kill him or her. Death is the for sure way to keep somebody silent. And it was very impactful to me, and it made sense. Suddenly there's a couple of assassination attempts on the former president of the United States because he will not back down. What do you think of that, and how it relates to free speech, how it relates to the assassination attempts on Donald Trump? And then if you could, after that, speak about the importance of this particular VP candidate, because if an assassin becomes successful in taking Donald Trump out after he becomes, elected, hypothetically, this vice presidential pick is very, very important.
Right. So first on the post that he made, I read that as well, and I absolutely agree. It was one of the most powerful things to read. And kind of goes back to what I was saying about the debate. He knows how to explain his views and his beliefs. And he has views and beliefs, unlike what you're seeing from Harris and Walz, where what they believe they can't talk about. So he was really able to put into print lots of complicated ideas, but that at the end of the day, you're like, that makes perfect sense. I think he's going to do the same in the debate. And as you say, we saw these 2 assassination attempts, and he's right. When we have the left talking about that this is a person who's a threat to democracy and we have to silence this misinformation, what better way to silence it than to kill the individual? And when you have those two things in tandem, the kind of threat to democracy and this is disinformation that is going to ruin our country, that is the natural progression for people who are mentally disturbed. And unfortunately, we have a segment of society who is like that. And I guess on your third point, you're right that we have to look at this, that this is a real risk. Donald Trump has already faced 2 attempts. There were 5 real risks, including from Iran. And don't think Iran isn't serious about this, because they are seeing what's going on in the Middle East under Biden, who doesn't support Israel. If it's Trump, don't think that there won't be a green light to take out their growing nuke program and to help support the local Iranians who detest their authoritarian government. I think that's something a lot of people miss, is that the Middle East is not all of the Middle East against Iran and the US. The Middle East also consists of Muslims, Arabs, Christians, every segment that are also being repressed, killed, and they want to be out of the boot or out from under the boot of these same people. So we very well could have another attempt. So who do you want to be your second? And Walz does not have the leadership. We've seen that when he bailed from going overseas and leading his troops. And Vance, who has been in DC as a senator, and one of the things I like about Vance the most is actually that he changes his views when he has more information. And that's one of the things that is pretty funny when you see the left attacking him. You used to say this, but now you say that. Well, you know what? Intelligent people, when presented with contrary evidence, actually change what they believe and why they think certain things should be done. And I think that that is a good trait to have in someone who's going to be the president, someone who is not knee jerk, who's going to look at the evidence. He has a totally different background than what Harris and Walz have, which I think would put him in a really good spot if, heaven forbid, that were to happen.
I think that's so important because, yeah, J.D. Vance has shifted his positions on a number of issues, and that includes the former president himself, Donald Trump. But he does listen, I was presented with this contrary evidence to shift my positions. I was given more information. When they asked Kamala Harris, why have you shifted your views? She basically says, I haven't. My values have not changed whatsoever, but obviously they have. So which indicates, or at least implies, that she's only shifting her position for the next 5 weeks until maybe she gets elected. And then she goes right back to where she's always stood on a variety of issues. That includes, the censorship of certain speech, which Tim Walz has come out and said those things as well. And you look at the border is another issue as well. You wrote something very, very, it was a very pithy article and very, I think, well constructed, this argument about Kamala Harris actually being the real threat to our democracy. And you put out some things that should be obvious, I think, to most people, but they're not, because a lot of it is being buried in most of the other media outlets. But thankfully, you and the Federalists are willing to talk about these issues. Her past support for a range of issues, not just things like this, gun control and going into people's houses and taking away their guns, or at least making sure they're using them properly, and the censorship of speech and the wide open borders, those kinds of things. But those are things that are indicative of somebody being a real threat to democracy and the destruction of this country from within. Can you talk about that? Some of the things that you really are taking away as you're observing Kamala Harris more and more.
Right. So I think if you look at it big picture, I like to look at it from the perspective of what makes our country what it is and our constitutional republic. Yes, we have a democracy at the bottom where it's voting for our representatives through the republic, but this is all in the Constitution. So if you look at what Harris is promoting, It is things that go completely contrary to the Constitution, such as that our federal government will secure and protect the border and is in charge of the idea of who gets in. That's part of the federal responsibility that they're supposed to do. If you do not have a border, you do not have a country. It comes down to it at that level. And when you have millions coming in, including people who are from regimes that want to take out the president or the former president, as well as other terrorists, you can't even protect the security of the country, which is the president's first responsibility. Then you go to free speech. Again, First Amendment, the right to bear arms, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, searches and seizures, things where she said, oh, we're going to go in and we're going to search for those guns. These are not, middling issues. These are cores of how our Constitution was formed. And one of the big ones is Article 3, which is the judicial branch of the government. She wants to completely remake the Supreme Court. I think the plan being floated now is to add like 9 more justices. And why? Because they don't like the decisions. The entire point of having a third branch is that it's separate and equal. It is a check on the other two. Just because you don't like the outcome doesn't mean you can just get rid of it. And if you do, you are getting rid of the foundation of our country.
Yeah, this is so incredibly dangerous. And I'm glad you brought that up because she does believe in court packing, however many more additional justices that could mean, but she also believes in term limits. And I've had this discussion with people who are very intelligent, and they seem to come around and support this idea of term limits for these U.S. Supreme Court justices. And I said, well, you know what that ends up doing, right? That ends up making them or turning them into more of a political entity. So they're making decisions and they're more influenced by, maybe their term is coming up. So they got to make some decisions that satisfy their constituents or their base rather than the merits of the case that they're presiding over. How important are the issue of term limits for justices? And should we ever be considering something like that?
Well, the good thing about the term limits is the Constitution prohibits that because they are appointed for good behavior, which means you can't have a term limit. The stacking of the courts is a little different because the Constitution does not say how many justices you have. So Congress could actually expand it from 9 to 12 to 15 to 18 without having any constitutional issue. But the key here to me is if you think term limits are going to solve a problem, all you have done is made the problem worse because now you have the justices who will be able to go out and be lobbyists, go out and be lawyers, and their decisions will be influenced by what they're seeing as their future paycheck. And that's the part that I think is pretty funny, is that they keep talking about getting money out of politics. Look at what happens to Congress because of the whole idea of lobbyists influencing them, or when they get out, they turn into lobbyists, or the revolving door that you see with the administration. All the DOJ folks that were under Obama, they went out and they started working for those big firms. And then now they came back in under Biden. You're going to have the exact same thing with the court if you add term limits. And it's just going to make everything more political, not less political.
It happens in every, whether it's the federal government in Congress, the House or the Senate, or in state legislatures. If it's a homeowners association, they're doing the same thing, trying to kind of grease the skids a little bit for their next move, their next, their future employment. Maybe they can get a nice job if they make certain decisions based on that thing. I want to talk a little bit about free speech because there have been now so many examples, surprisingly so, from Kamala Harris, from Tim Walz, from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, from Hillary Clinton saying that they would really like to control the media narrative, that the media needs to do a better job of sticking with this narrative. John Kerry came out and saying that, free speech, he said this at the World Economic Forum, free speech is really kind of a hindrance to governance. It's keeping us from really being able to more efficiently govern the people that we best see fit rather than the people governing themselves. And there seems to be a broadening acceptance of this narrative. Otherwise, I don't think they'd be speaking so publicly this way about, censoring people and certain types of speech. What's happening here, and I know it's unconstitutional, but it seems like this is becoming more, readily accepted to talk this way.
John Kerry's was saying the quiet part out loud. And the reason they can do that is because they spent the last 8 years convincing the American public that there's something called disinformation and misinformation and that it's dangerous and it's a threat to our country. So much so that now they can say, yeah, we need to do this to save you, to protect you. And part of the problem is we have generations of students who have lost the understanding of liberty, who have lost the idea of free speech because they've been trained that words hurt. When I went through school, it was sticks and stones. Now, what is it? That's hate speech. We have to stop it. And this is dangerous. And that's the generation who is seeing this idea of free speech as dangerous, that we have to come and kind of reinvigorate of why we have free speech. One of the things to me, though, that is so amazing is the whole COVID scenario was a perfect case study in why restricting speech is dangerous. We saw it play out because everything the officials told us was wrong. Mm-hmm. And what they silenced as being false was true. That's the case in everything. It's the case in war. It's the case in economics, that the more speech, the better to get to the truth. And we saw what happened with COVID. So why would anyone in this country think that silencing speech is good?
They're still doing it. It's one of the things that really, truly infuriates me. I don't get really angry about a lot of different things, but the fact that they are still censoring and suppressing information. COVID was so disastrous, and the way it was approached and the suffering that it led to so many people, and the amount of suicides that were kept under wraps and reclassified as COVID deaths so people wouldn't understand the calamity that was self-destructive. This didn't have to happen this way, and we had the information back then. And I've had these discussions and even trying to bring this out, somewhat recently on the air, that we knew back in 2020 that if these quarantines go into effect, that the ramifications of that and the suicides and the mental illness will go up exponentially and will not come down for years after the quarantines are lifted. And that was suppressed back then, and then we brought it back up again. It was suppressed again. It's a tragic thing that the media cannot go out and look back at what happened in 2020 as a massive warning of what the government is capable of doing. And the government is capable of manipulating you through the tool of the news media to make you do what it wants you to do against your best interest. And it's a shame that that has occurred. And it's a huge warning now about what this current administration is trying to do, is trying to shut you and me down by not allowing us to speak about truths that they're implementing. And it's a very dangerous situation. One of those things that Kamala Harris is very much supportive of is eliminating the filibuster. And she's talked about this as, vice president, especially after, these various laws regarding, she wants to get past a federal abortion law. And to do that, she needs to get rid of the Senate filibuster. What is the role? Can you explain to those of us who don't understand, what is a filibuster and what is the purpose of a filibuster in the U.S. Senate?
Sure. So with a filibuster, it basically is to shut down debate. You need to have a supermajority. So 51 people might vote for a federal guarantee of abortion till birth, but you need to get 60 to close down the filibuster. And the filibuster is where you just get up and talk. And they, in the old days, they actually made them stand up and talk. Now it's more of a gentleman's agreement where, okay, we don't have 60 votes to stop debate, therefore we can't vote on it. So the filibuster is a check on majority authority. So we speak of us having a constitutional republic, and that the people who represent us are voted on by the individuals. But majority power can be abused, which is why we have individual rights. And the filibuster is another protection, that if we just get 51 senators, that could be the majority abusing the minority. So the filibuster is protecting us against that. And I think the best way for liberals to look at it is, think about it being Trump and him having a 51 majority. Do you want what he wants going through with no limitations? And if the answer is, oh, we don't have to worry about that, then how come you're complaining about his 3 Supreme Court justices? Because Chuck Schumer is the one who got rid of the filibuster for justices and judges, which allowed for them to go through with 51 votes. The Democrats did it. The Republicans said, fine. And they got through who they wanted. They never would have gotten through if the filibuster was there. It remains for legislation. And I'm kind of both views, because sometimes I'm like, oh, I hate the filibuster because I want this law that we have 57 votes for. But it really does protect the minority from majority abuse.
Yes, and it's kind of a double-edged sword in that respect. But to me, it just reminds me of, like, listen, we learned some pretty important lessons in the early part of the founding of this country, and one of them is how quickly and how easily individual liberties can be stripped away if a majority has the decision on how you live. And I think the original Articles of Confederation, that didn't work out, and that's why they wrote the Constitution, because what they're finding out is that if there is a simple majority, like 51% of the people in this country can tell you how to live, or you, Mark, down the street, or you, Martha, down the street, can no longer do this or that, because the majority doesn't want you to do that. That turned out to be another type of authoritarian regime. It wasn't a single dictator, but it was a majority dictator. So they had to write the Constitution so that, you could live freely so long as you, single person or a majority of people, don't infringe on a single person's individual rights. And to me, that's kind of what this filibuster represents, that you don't have this authoritarian kind of bully group of people infringing on individual liberties. Is that kind of the concept that we're seeing here with this filibuster in the Senate versus the House?
Right, absolutely. And I would also add that also the Electoral College and the idea of a Senate having 2 senators versus based on population.
Yeah.
Again, you're seeing the left want to get rid of it because they can't get the laws that they want passed. But the reason that was in the Constitution is recognizing the needs for states to be able to protect state interests and the interest of their citizens. And when they talk about getting rid of the Electoral College, what are they going to do? They're going to basically give majority rule to the urban metropolitan centers, and the folks in Western North Carolina who need help, they're on their own.
Why do you think, as it relates to the filibuster, that media outlets are continuously criticizing Republicans for what they call extreme positions on abortion, and they remain silent on the Democrats' real push right now for a federal law that would allow abortions for all 9 months of pregnancies with no restrictions? Why do you think the media is so silent about this? I mean, that question wasn't even brought up in this previous debate. Donald Trump asked the question, but the moderators did not, and Kamala Harris didn't answer Donald Trump's questions about if she supports any restriction on any type of abortion ever.
And then they lied about what the real law is. So I think there are 2 parts to this. One, in general, the media is very left leaning, and very pro abortion. And the second part is, I don't know how educated they really are on abortion law. What they'll do is they'll look at it and says, well, you can't have an abortion after viability. And the answer is, look at what it says, unless a healthcare practitioner says it is necessary to protect your health. You know what health means? Well, look here. Health means your social health. It means your economic health. It means anything. In other words, you can have an abortion until birth, no matter what. So I honestly don't know if some of the journalists who are reporting are just ignorant or they are purposefully lying on that. But they overwhelmingly are pro-abortion. And because of that, they're going to spin always in favor of abortion and always against life. And you saw that with the death of those women from the abortion pill, not a pro-life ban, but the abortion pill. And yet they're continuing to lie to women that you're going to be prosecuted. And what happens then? The woman doesn't go and get care. So it really comes down to, who are these journalists?
Yeah, it's a shame because there's no one I know of that is in favor of prosecuting women if they have an abortion, or if they if they try to use IVF, those kind of treatments, or if they have an ectopic pregnancy. There's nothing of the sort that exists like that. But that is the advertising, that's the spin, and the media is complicit in all of this. And it's so sad where we are now. And I'm grateful for people like you and for the publication for which you write regularly and so well at the Federalist. And people should go to thefederalist.com and read it daily, because there's a lot of really good, enlightening information. I would say scholarly information, but written in layman's terms. Otherwise, I couldn't understand it. So I'm very appreciative of you and for the Federalist as well. So Margot, thanks again for coming on. I guess one final question. What do you think the outcome of tonight's debate? How do you think these two, Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, are going to perform?
I think that Vance is going to have several mic drop moments, both against his opponent and against his other opponent, the one asking the questions. He knows how to take on both types of opponents, and I think he's going to do a great job.
Yeah, I do too. And I think CBS News now, they will have the moderator. CBS News is a very now far-left liberal network, but they promised to do zero fact-checking. I think they should do some on Tim Walz to kind of make it even based on what ABC News did last time around. Margot Cleveland is the senior legal correspondent for the Federalist. Margot, so good to talk to you again. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much, Tom. Take care.
You too. All right, Margot Cleveland there, just a great intellect, and she's an attorney. She's a former professor at Notre Dame, and she knows her stuff as well. Just an update quickly on some of the latest polls that have come out in terms of the presidential race right now. The national look at things: Trump versus Harris. Kamala Harris 49.1% on average to Donald Trump's 47.3%. So Kamala Harris on the national level is ahead, but you look at some of these battleground states, Donald Trump is ahead, but it's very, very tight. Pennsylvania, Donald Trump's up by 0.1%. In North Carolina, 0.8% for Donald Trump. A little more margin there in Georgia, 1.4%. Trump leading Kamala Harris in the state of Georgia. Arizona, Trump is up by 2 points in that state. Wisconsin, Kamala Harris up by 0.8. Michigan, Kamala Harris up 1.4%. Come on, you Michiganders, you Michiganians, or even if you're Michiganish, get back out there on the in the polls, answer them, and get involved in this. And then Nevada, of course, another battleground state, Trump versus Harris. Harris is up 1.3%. Want to take your comments as well, and then we're going to get to some other news real quickly. But we have a couple comments want to respond to here. Cameron's going to put them up on the screen. Cameron, we've got the engineer, our good friend, the engineer, joining us, a Patreon supporter as well. Thank you, the engineer. Kamala Harris, May 2007, when she was district attorney of San Francisco. This is what she said. Just because you have the right to own a gun doesn't mean we can't enter your home. to make sure you're acting responsibly. Yeah, that's dangerous. And it does mean you can't enter the Kamala Harris. I mean, she's what, a prosecutor, an attorney. She's a politician. Does she not? Did she take a civics course? I'm sure she did at some point. What she was that's a violation of, I forget which amendment it is, but search and seizure. You cannot go into somebody's house and search for things and then seize things without some type of real probable cause, and that includes guns. You might be, listen, what she couches it at, you might be a responsible gun owner. So she's making the claim that even though you're responsible, we can still go inside your house and search for evidence to see if you're not as responsible as we thought. No, you can't do that. That's unconstitutional. That's rhetoric out there, and it's shameful. That's the person. That was way back in 2007. That is the same Kamala Harris right now who is running for president of the United States. We have another one, Cameron. One more comment. Annie, would they commit to protecting free speech and freedom of the press for all, even on positions they believe are wrong? Yeah, that's the thing, Annie. It's a great question because now there's something called disinformation, and they believe. If you look at Tim Walz, who's running for vice president right now, you look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you look at Kamala Harris, you look at Hillary Clinton, these Democrats are coming out more and more and saying, if there's something called disinformation or something that we have deemed to be not true, then we can step in and we can censor it. And that's not true. That's not constitutional. In fact, they can't come in. If something is a lie, like a flat-out, bald-faced lie, they still can't come in and censor you for saying that. Because if that was the case, as you would probably know, they'd be censored all the time. Just look at all the advertisements from Kamala Harris making false claims about her opponent, Donald Trump. Total lies and disinformation. But it's free speech, so they're allowed to do that. Great question, Annie. Thanks for your participation. Very much. All right, I want to get you updated on this, because this is pretty tragic what's happening. Hurricane Helene leaving a trail of destruction across the southeast. Death toll now surpassing 125. I think it's 128 or so. Take a look at this video. Entire towns in North Carolina still cut off from aid after slamming into, Florida's Big Bend as a Category 4 storm with winds reaching 140 miles per hour. Helene tore through several states. Catastrophic flooding in those states. Power lines are down. Massive storm surges. And in western North Carolina, this was radical what happened there. Dozens of people remain still unaccounted for as local officials are scrambling there to restore communications and deliver vital supplies like food and water. And you can go up into the mountain communities of North Carolina, which you would think would be safe from this kind of flooding. No, they're right in the thick of it, and some towns have been completely wiped off the map as a result of this. So President Biden has approved a major disaster declaration, which allows FEMA, the resources to begin, flowing into that region, though many are now questioning, the speed of this and the coordination of the response. You see Donald Trump there, former President Donald Trump. He made a real heartfelt visit to Valdosta, Georgia yesterday to witness the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. And he toured the devastation firsthand. And Donald Trump led a moment of silence for the victims. He assured the families that his administration would be there every step of the way because, remember, this is going to take a long time to rebuild after this. So during the recovery process, it's going to take some time. So, he's going to be there. His administration will be if he is elected. He was delivering truckloads of relief supplies as well. Listen, he partnered with Franklin Graham. This is how quickly they move. Samaritan's Purse, a great charity where they provide care for these disaster areas, and they go in and provide food and clothing and all those types of housing and shelter and medical care. So Donald Trump was there, standing with first responders, praising their dedication and their resilience. And he said, listen, working together, we will overcome these hardships. And Trump also emphasized the need for immediate restoration of these communication services, because without it, it's very, very difficult. He went out to Elon Musk. This is how he works. He goes to the private sector, goes to Elon Musk, who happens to own Starlink, which he can now deploy based on Donald Trump's request. Hey, can you help these out with communications? Because that would be a huge help. That's the private sector, and that's the relationship Donald Trump has with the private sector. By the way, Donald Trump also called, this is why, millionaires and billionaires can be helpful. He's already raised, with the help of billionaires and millionaires, $1 million to this GoFundMe campaign that he has set up. And he criticized the federal response to this disaster. He points to what he views as really slow and like inadequate efforts on behalf of the Biden administration. He goes in, he's already raising tons of money for them. And you got a lot of people like Bass Pro Shops is there, Dana White, Kelly Loeffler, William Ackman. These are conservatives donating out of their funding, their own pockets, going directly to those hardest hit by the hurricane. And the media, of course, I don't know if you saw some headlines, but listen, there was a ridiculous headlines. Channel 4, NBC affiliate in Detroit, Michigan, their headline on their website was that Donald Trump spews disinformation in a hard-hit area of, from Hurricane Helene, rather than saying, Donald Trump is raising $1 million and he brings in supplies to help flood victims. That's not what they focus on. That wasn't the headline. They just called it, falsehoods that he claimed and lies. It's the constant attempt going after Donald Trump's visit, rather than highlighting the various efforts that he is making. I mean, give the guy a break. Trump shows up, and it says, let's not be political, and the media goes political instead. So Donald Trump continues his campaigning in several battleground states, as we know. He did stop by Michigan a couple of times last week, and I caught up with I was at one of the rallies with our team here at Tom Jordan Live, and I caught up with some Trump supporters. And let's focus on one for today, as time only permits for that, with a gentleman named Chris.
This is the real struggle and agony and pain right now, and especially in America.
What's the biggest thing that you're struggling with right now in our current political climate?
I would say I'm currently struggling with just getting groceries and trying to pay my consumer's energy bill. As a college student, that's supposed to be education is supposed to be the gateway to success in life. And if I'm not given all the resources and tools, I feel like my mom said a few weeks ago, she felt like she was a failure. And I said in a paragraph for me, I appreciate everything you do in my life, Mom, no matter how much breath you got in your body. Because my dad passed away 2 years ago. And, all this, especially in this economy, it's not going to break me. Not being able to buy groceries, not being able to buy clothes, not being able to buy our essentials. And, President Trump, God bless President Trump, because he wants to make life affordable in America again with the help of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
You're African American.
Yeah.
Yep. And you're a Republican, I take it.
Yeah.
And you hear a lot that the Republicans are the party of slavery and racism, and somehow the Democrats claim they're pure of all of those things?
Exactly. I've heard people say that. Here's a fun fact. 60 years ago in 1964, 82% Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to be passed, but only 63% Democrats voted for it. How could there be a large margin in voter for the Civil Rights Act of 1964?
Yeah, Chris was great. He refuted a lot of things that the Democrats are putting out there. And he said that I think, if I remember correctly, he was once a Democrat, but he just stopped buying all these lies and these myths that the Democrats keep putting out there. And I forget, there were plenty of a wide variety of people at the Trump rally. He's a couple times last week. I think he's coming back this week as well. So that'll be interesting. So, hey, listen, thanks for your time watching the program today, Tom Jordan Live. Go to tomjordanlive.com. You can get more information about the program and all the various platforms that we are streaming this live on. So there's a live stream every morning, 9 a.m. Eastern time on Facebook, on YouTube, and on X. And then the program lives on those platforms in addition to various podcast platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. Go to tomjordanlive.com. You can learn more about it, or just subscribe if you're on YouTube or on Facebook or on X. That helps us out quite a bit. And if you feel up to it, go to patreon.com, Tom Jordan Live, and we sure would like your assistance there as well. If you take part in that, it's very inexpensive. It's like, $2.50 a month, $2.50, or maybe $5. There's different tiers. But we are developing exclusive content for you, and we'll have live conversations just between us for our Patreon subscribers coming up in the near future. So thanks for all that. Again, thanks for watching today. We will be back tomorrow. Enjoy the vice presidential debate tonight, and God bless you. We'll talk to you later.